You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
We are back. Sons of the Shoe is back. Nick Wilson, Spencer German. Hi there. Hello there. How are you doing? We got a big game this week, Ohio State versus Iowa in Cleveland. But before we get to any of that, guys, as always, please make sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcast. We love to beg. I ain't too proud to beg, just like the Temptations there. Follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Apple, Spotify. Have I mentioned Apple? 923thefan.com, the free Odyssey app. We subside on your support. Also, please make sure to follow 923 The Fan on YouTube. You can subscribe there, like our videos, chat with us. We've seen some of you guys. We love to hear from you guys. But hi, Spencer. How you doing, buddy?
Pretty good, Nick. Excited about this matchup this weekend. Yeah, it's kind of the last I don't know what you want to call it, like the last test before the big showdown with Oregon. Obviously, the last dress rehearsal. I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't call it a dress rehearsal. That's a little unfair to Iowa because they are a tough team, as we know.
I think what's interesting is this has the markings of something we fear in sports and certainly in college football all the time. But yeah, I mean, this is, if you pass this test and then go to Oregon, you know, I think this is the kind of test, like Michigan State, good team. You get nothing from blowing them out other than you didn't screw up. Any of the MAC teams or the Sun Belt team that you played, there's not a lot you can learn. You can just try and look for little things. This is a game you can probably learn some stuff from. So we are bringing back the Michigan Panic Meter coming up in the third segment, followed by 4 Down Territory. We also have a big question, the big vernacular that we use for games like this. But let's get into our preview right here. Ohio State versus Iowa in Columbus at Ohio Stadium there, Spencer. It is a 3:30 p.m. kickoff, so it is that prime time game there. It is on CBS, and again, as we said, it is in Columbus. But we're going to start doing our previews a little different here, and we're going to start on upset scale. And so basically on 1 to 10, we're going to talk about how concerned we are about Iowa upsetting Ohio State. I'll cede the floor to you there, Spence.
So it's funny because like if this game was in Iowa at Kinnick Stadium, I think I'd feel a little bit differently. We know that place can be a house of horrors. We always hear about like the pink.
I can't believe you talk about Iowa women that way.
Horrors.
Oh, okay. That's multiple horrors. Okay. Oh no.
That Nick was thinking of. But no, we know that place can be a tough place to play. You hear about the pink locker room, just all those different things. But because this game is because this game is at Ohio State, I feel pretty comfortable about Ohio State winning it. I don't know, like I think there's always a little bit of nervousness when you go into a game that's a Big Ten matchup against a Big Ten team that's tough, and you know there's another big matchup on the other side because you know what's looming next weekend in Oregon. But I'm hoping that they go into this thing and take the right approach of, hey, we got to get through this one first. There's some things that we can work on here. And that's kind of, so I guess, how are we doing the scale? Are we saying like 1 to 10? How worried are we?
Yeah, I believe I said that 3 minutes ago.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just kidding. I promised you I'm just kidding. I was actually waiting for you to ask the question because I was like, he hasn't given a number yet.
Yeah, that's why I was like, am I just like kind of rambling about my feelings, or am I actually giving you a number? So if 10 is like ultimate panic, I'd probably say I'm at like a 5.7, somewhere in that range. Like I'm a little bit worried because Iowa can give you a scare every now and then, but I think their offense is anemic enough that you should be able to pull away because Ohio State's just a more talented team. I think more so my worries come from like if Iowa is able to expose something. And I know we're going to talk about Caleb Johnson, their very good running back. If he's able to have a really good game, is that something that's almost a weakness moving forward for Ohio State? So I would say at like a 5.7.
I'm actually just going to go an 8 out of 10. I think this is a
Nick's
real
more
test.
panic than me. Okay.
This is not panic. This is just you can absolutely. I mean, they're like Kentucky to Ole Miss. Maybe Kentucky's a hair better than Iowa. Maybe Ohio State's significantly better than Ole Miss. I don't know how you cut this, but I think to me, when I look for the ingredients of what goes into an upset, right? Especially if you're a supremely talented team, we start with, all right, is it the biggest game on the horizon or is it the tune-up before a big game? So, okay, check. This is the tune-up before Oregon. So young teams or teams that might think they've already accomplished things can look ahead to the bigger matchup. That's just natural. And I think Ohio State players are smart enough to know the importance of the Oregon game, even though, this game, even though the margin for error is much bigger than it ever was because of expanded playoffs. Then I go to the next thing is all right, let's just look at stylistically. Did they have the ability to lull you into a kind of fight that you're not as prepared to fight? And the answer is, I think maybe. I think maybe if this turns into taking away the run game by the Iowa defense, and all right, let's leave it up to big plays. Big plays can be fluky, and big plays. That one of the things that Iowa does really well is shutting down the run and limiting big plays, even though their pass defense isn't one of the better teams in pass defenses in college football. Okay, so stylistically, there's some concern. And here's the other one. The third one is historic, right? Iowa has historically trolled Ohio State in moments like this. They don't do it every time, but they have done it enough. And Kirk Ferentz gets his boys up for games like this. They've done it to Penn State recently. They've certainly done it to Ohio State within the last 15, 20 years. So, Ohio State should win this, and Ohio State should be able to assert its dominance. But when one team is so keyed in on their identity, I think it does open up that concern of they've played this card before, they've done this consistently in the Kirk Ferentz era. Now, how do you avoid succumbing to the trap that is playing them on their terms? You're still vastly more talented. You should be able to make big plays here. But if Iowa can take away those big plays and limit the run game and put it through the air, that's where turnovers happen. And all of a sudden, this game gets a lot closer than people expect. So that then brings us to names to know for this one. You already gave us one, the stellar running back, Caleb Johnson, an Ohio kid out of Hamilton. This kid's already got 700 yards and 9 touchdowns through, I think it's 4 games. This kid is a beast. And again, part of lulling Ohio State into a dogfight is being able to keep the offense on the field and putting pressure on them. How do you do that? You run the ball. This kid is a stud.
Yeah, and that is kind of, I talked about it after the game last week, where I just think the last couple games we've seen that, I don't know. I feel like linebacker is maybe a little bit of a weakness for the Buckeyes. I just don't know that they don't always take good angles. They've had some issues tackling guys and kind of tracking and getting it. We've seen some teams be able to get up the middle and gash them a little bit with the run game. And so when you get a running back like Caleb Johnson, who, let's face it, this is the best running back you've faced to this point in the season. There will probably be more down the line. Donovan Jackson comes to mind from Michigan. There's going to be others that you face that are just as good, if not better. But in terms of right now, through the season at this point, this is the best guy you faced. And Iowa's offensive line is very senior laden. It's an upper class laden group, and they should be able to create some opportunities there and some holes there, especially on a defensive front that I feel like, in another thing we talked about post game, Nick, I just think Ohio State's defensive line, I think they're a very good pass rush defensive line. But I think they've struggled a little bit without somebody like Mike Hall Jr. in the middle this year, where they've given some ground in the run game and gotten pushed around a little bit by more physical offensive lines. Caleb Johnson is an extension of that offensive line. And so that front seven for Ohio State has to play really, really well in this game because Johnson can take things over. He's a really good player.
Well, Johnson's great. Cade McNamara is not necessarily a name you need to know, but you do know it. He's the guy that was the quarterback for Michigan when they ended the endless throttling of Michigan at the hands of Ohio State in the rivalry. He was then usurped, or his job was then usurped by J.J. McCarthy. He's incredibly limited, but Tim Lester, the offensive coordinator, does run a much better offense just in terms of scoring output here. But really, it comes down to this Iowa team is, again, this is the atypical Kirk Ferentz team, and they are stout in the trenches. We're talking Connor Colby, their guard, Logan Jones, the center. On the defensive side of the ball, it's Yaya Black, who's a senior defensive tackle. I mean, they just continue to hit you in the trenches. And from the offensive side of things, a familiar name, Jim Lachey's kid, color analyst, former Ohio State player, Luke Lachey, the tight end, former Buckeye himself. Again, because you mentioned linebackers, that is a spot where you can get beat there. Luke Lachey is a hell of a football player and very likely a future tight end in the NFL. So I would say that those are the names that I'm most concerned about, but Luke Lachey has the ability to help Cade McNamara just enough to make this game certainly comfortable and maybe a little uncomfortable for Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, that was the name I was going to bring up next was Lachey. He's kind of projected to be one of the top, per usual, right? Iowa tight end is going to be a guy that's drafted fairly highly next year in the draft. He's one of the top guys considered in this 2025 class of NFL prospects. So yeah, they're a tight end factory, obviously, and that's a guy that can also take over a game. So between those two, yeah, I mean, there's certainly some concern there in terms of having to defend those guys, especially, like I said, when the front seven has been, at least from my perspective, somewhat of a concern. I also think, Yaya Black is good up front. I know that another guy that's performed really well for them is linebacker Nick Jackson. He's had a really good season so far this year. And
Jay Higgins as well, another great
Higgins
linebacker.
and Aaron Graves up front is another guy, defensive tackle, that's been able to do some nice things. And I like, one of the things I noticed about both the defensive line, the offensive line, as I alluded to with this Iowa team, and it's kind of what you said, like they have they're really good up front, and it's the classic Kirk Ferentz sort of style. I think this defensive line is also very upperclassman laden, which similar to Ohio State, those guys have experience. They know how they're not going to back down from any challenges. And I would imagine, given how Ohio State's offensive line play has been the last couple of years, and at times this year, they probably feel like they have some good matchups there in the trenches that they have a chance to win.
Everybody's focusing, as we move to key matchup here, everybody's going to be focusing on, can Iowa score enough? I don't really think that's necessarily the conversation. I think from the Ohio State things, it's, can you score the way you're used to scoring? And if that doesn't happen, how do you react, right? Does your team get outside of itself? Because this is a classic Big Ten matchup of probably the best team on both sides of the ball in the trenches. There might be other teams that have a better O-line. There might be better teams that have a better D-line. But just in terms of the combination of how good they are in the trenches, and for me, listen, I think if you wanted to spin this one way, we could focus on the big plays, the explosive plays. For me, it comes down to, can Iowa stop Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson? Chip Kelly loves to run the ball. That's such a huge part of what he wants to do. But I still feel like this O-line is a huge part of what either makes or breaks the run game. And that's just because there have been times where you and I have come out of a game saying it's pass pro. Pass pro scares me the most. And then there have been one or two games early here where you're like, well, I didn't really love what I saw in run pro, and pass pro was fine. So when you look at a defense that is, I want to say, top 10 against the run, can your offensive line play up to this matchup and open up those holes, or are you going to have to fight for every yard on the ground? Because if they can bottle up Quinshon and Travion, this game gets close really quickly, because one turnover by Will Howard all of a sudden could be the difference between a 20-point win and maybe, just maybe, a close enough game and maybe even an upset. What's your key matchup?
Yeah, for me, it's going to be kind of what I alluded to already, but I just think like the matchup in the trenches is going to be massively important on both sides. It's Iowa's defensive line against Ohio State's offensive line that has had its fair share of struggles this year. And on the flip side, it's Ohio State's defensive line, like I said, that I think has gotten pushed around at times in terms of teams running the football on them. and trying to sort of amend some of those problems and fix some of those problems this week against a good running team and a good running back in Caleb Johnson. So I know I don't mean to simplify it down to like the most cliche thing ever that we say in football, where the game is often won in the trenches. But week to week, we always have our eye on that group, and so to see that if they're able to get that push, both offensively and defensively, and slow down this rushing attack, because Oregon's going to try to run the football quite a bit as well. I think that's kind of the thing for me that I'm really honing in on. And if they can actually win a game that's a tough Big Ten matchup, we always talk about Big Ten football being physical, being tough, all these different things. If they can win a tough Big Ten matchup on both sides, like in the trenches, I think that bodes well for us kind of getting a sense of how good this team can be. And I think it's a confidence boost for us as we continue to follow this team and watch this team in the weeks ahead, because, hey, they did it against a tough Iowa team, and that's about as tough as it's going to get in terms of those types of that style of play. So if they can do it against Iowa, they can do it against anyone.
Well, I do think like this is a game where if the Ohio State offensive line specifically, comes to play, we can put it to bed. Like if you show up and push these guys around the trenches, I won't have a doubt about you doing that against really any other O-line, D-line you're going to see in the Big Ten. Playoffs is a little different here, but let's go to Educated Wish, which if you guys are just new to this, because we're new to this, it basically means, what is the thing you're hoping to see out of this game from the Ohio State side of things? Where do you start there, Spence?
Yeah, I think I just need to see like a game where the Buckeyes are able to stop the run, and that goes along, that falls in line with sort of what I said about the guys up front on defense, and not just being kind of this finesse pass rush team, but a team that can get some push in the run game and clog up those lanes, because I think there's been an issue there. But also with the linebackers, like being able to track Caleb Johnson, being able to make tackles, being able to make those plays, because I think that's something that we've seen in recent weeks. They've struggled a little bit against the run, and can they shore that up for a tougher stretch of the schedule that's coming, where you have an Oregon team that likes to do a lot of different things on offense, but will run the football at you, a Penn State team that has a very good running back in their own right and a very good run game in their own right. Like, there's some tough matchups coming up where that's going to be something that you need to be able to fall back on and have be a strength for you. So I am like desperate to see how this team defends the run in this game. And if they're able to do that, and again, shut down Iowa, because that's what they're going to primarily look to do, then again, it's to your point, like this is the perfect storm for you to walk away feeling confident, and it answers a lot of questions about that phase of the game specifically for them.
My educated wish for this game is that if Iowa is successful in turning this into a mud fight, it's not about, well, can you just wear them down over 4 quarters? Because I think that's one path here, right? If you just keep running, just keep trying, eventually, even the strongest defenses can get wore out. But that's not really where I'm at, because I think that's actually something that is very likely to happen. That you just kind of continue your game. To me, it is my educated wish is, how does Will Howard hold up in this test? If his offensive line is not run blocking and all of a sudden it's on his shoulders, can he make enough electric plays? Because the one thing you can count on with Iowa's defense is they just have integrity. I mean, they just play. They're so well coached. They're so disciplined. So that's a great test for Will Howard, who's played against either young or undisciplined defenses, or not very talented, not this caliber. And then defensively, to me, it is, I think starting with stop the run is that's great. But I think it's also, let's continue to see you grow in dominance, because as good as the Ohio State defense has been, I don't think they've been as good as the numbers.
Yeah.
Like, I think some of the numbers are because of who they've played. I'd like to see Ohio State be the best defense in this. That would go a long way for me to saying, all right, everything we hoped about this team is true.
Yeah, I was going to add one more thing, because we had a chance to talk to Albert Breer, I know, earlier in the week on 92 Through the Fan, who is a Ohio State alumni, obviously. And he sort of brought this up, and I think this is a good point. Like, it would be nice to just see this team on defense, like, dominate, like just completely, because the first half of games recently has been a struggle. And so from start to finish, like if you can dominate a team like Iowa, hold them to maybe like 3 points in the first half, and really limit them for the entirety of the game, that's a confidence boost as you get ready for this Oregon game, and then what kind of looms on the other side of that as well. So I fall in line with Albert on that. Like it's stopping the run, yes, but I would love to see, my educated wish would be to see just a dominant defensive effort that gives us a lot of confidence going forward.
All right, last one here on the Ohio State Iowa preview. Thanks to our friends at FanDuel, it's time for the odds. And currently on FanDuel, Ohio State is a 19.5-point favorite. If you want to choose Iowa to win, they are plus 890.
Wow.
Which is gigantic for a matchup that could be close. And the over-under set at 45.5 points. I have a lot of mind to take Iowa in the points because, again, I don't think this is just about, well, can Iowa score with Ohio State? We focus on that too much in matchups like this. I think it's, can Ohio State be bottled up by Iowa long enough to make this a closer game than expected? 19.5 points is kind of the sweet spot for a lot of the projection models I've seen. I'd still pretty comfortably take Iowa in the points here because this is one of those games where you err on the side of upset. And if we're gambling, not if we're Ohio State fans, but if we're gambling, and then if you take the L, you took the L, you got the random time Iowa pooped the bed, or Ohio State's just too freaking good.
You know, it's funny that they're a 19.5-point favorite, but the over-under's 45. What is it, 45.5, you said?
Yeah. Yeah. Vegas wants you to take the over.
They think, like, they must think Ohio State's going to win like 20-0. Like they're just going to, it's going to, yeah, that's crazy.
Because the over, by the way, is minus 105. So that's that's like the sweetest odds you can get on the over under.
See, the reason I take Ohio State though is I just think like this feels like one of those games where like it might be a slog early, and it's going to take Ohio State some time to kind of build some momentum offensively and start to pull away. But then I just feel like late in the game, you're going to get some like garbage score, like you'll get a couple scores late that you know put it to bed. And they kind of I like reminiscent of like last year, Michigan and Iowa played in the Big Ten championship game, and I remember thinking like, wow, I was keeping it close. Maybe this thing's interesting. And then you realize just how bad their offense was, and they really couldn't do anything. And by the end of that game, Michigan pulled away by a large margin. So I think I would still lean taking Ohio State if I was picking against the spread. Yeah, I think your thinking is correct in, you know, maybe leaning Iowa a little bit, because this is the type of game that they tend to sort of slog up and make ugly and make more of a dogfight and keep it within that 19.5-point margin.
All right, guys, we've got to continue on as Ohio State, Iowa on Saturday, 3:30 kickoff in Columbus. We've got to get to whether this potentially could be the dreaded T word. No, not the T word Spencer's not allowed to say here anymore. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. All right, guys, I think you already know from the preview segment here how I'm feeling about this game. But given that you've got Iowa next week, a lot of people are talking. It's me.
You mean Oregon next week?
What did I say?
Iowa. We got Iowa this week.
Well, we can't edit that out, so I look like a schmuck, but well deserved it because I am a schmuck. All right, so since you have Iowa, no, bless it, I almost said it again. Since you have Oregon next week, it makes people wonder. I'm the person. Makes people wonder whether this could be the dreaded trap game. You said it at what, 5 point something. So does that mean you think it's a potential trap game, or does that mean you don't think it's a potential trap game?
I do think it's a potential trap game. I'm just not as I don't know. Like when I think of a trap game for this Ohio State team, given how talented they are, I kind of envision like maybe they look past them a little bit, but because they're so talented, I still think they come out on top. Like I don't think they completely fall asleep at the wheel. I also just think like this team has largely been able to this point, like talk the talk in terms of we know we're a national championship contender, so we're not taking anybody lightly. And I just think, Ryan Day knows how this conference is. He knows Iowa's going to be a tough team. So, I mean, yes, by definition, you have a matchup with Oregon waiting on the other side, and that's your real chance to prove who you are, where you fit in the national championship contending picture. Also, I would assume there's going to be College Game Day out there. I'm sure maybe Fox is going to go out there for the game. It's going to be the scene for next weekend. So you got to kind of think through all those things and realize it's a huge moment. It's a huge thing. But in the same breath, we can't get too far ahead of ourselves. I don't know. I'm worried about it because it's a Big Ten matchup, a tough Big Ten matchup. And then you know what's looming on the other side. But I also just think history shows us that this team knows Iowa can get you. I get it's not maybe some of the same players that were on those teams, but I don't think Ryan Day is going to let them fall asleep at the wheel. I think they're going to come ready to go. And that's why I'm not overly worried, but I still have a little bit of concern that it is a trap game. Yes.
I think under Urban, I had more worry about trap games because it seemed like every year, once they won the national championship, it seemed like every year there was one game that bit them in the ass.
Yeah.
Ryan really has not had that to the same degree that Urban had. And again, I don't think there's as much in-game pressure if you do fall behind or if there's a quick slog fest going on here, because I think in the back of your mind, hey, this is not life or death. You can sustain 1 or 2 losses, and we still have the talent once we get into the playoffs, even if we're the 12th seed, to make some noise. So I think the pressure is different, and I think that's an interesting thing that we can see manifest itself throughout this year at true national championship contenders like Alabama, like Georgia, like Ohio State, and certainly Texas.
Sorry.
Go ahead. With that being said, I think these are the games Kirk Ferentz lives for. And, we gave you all the stylistic reasons in our preview why this game could be a little snugger than you want it to be. Listen, I think this team, I think we conflate with national championship caliber team as if you start the season and end the season that way. I think there's plenty of teams who out the course of the season show that we have talent, that we have this, that, the other. But it is about the consistency, and this is that first challenge. It's not as if you beat Iowa, it's not as if I'm turning around and saying you're going to blow out Oregon. But, really to me, winning a championship and being a championship caliber team is about, can you consistently stack those performances and not get ahead of yourself? And I think actually this being in Columbus could be a potential setting for a trap game, because you're always a little bit more comfortable with home cooking. And so you got a team hungry to make a statement in Iowa, going on the road. They're playing for nothing because nobody's picking Iowa as far as I can tell. And you've got a team that has done everything that they've been asked to do so far, but hasn't faced a challenge like this yet. You merge those things, the idea of home cooking sometimes is too sweet. And then on the other side of this is the Oregon game, a game which has all the bright lights, all the glitz, all the glamour, all the swag, right? Those things make me uneasy. So I do think it has every marking of a trap game, even if I still think Iowa is probably 2 cuts below Ohio State when it comes to talent. And it might even be 3 cuts below. But again, that hasn't always mattered to Iowa.
Yeah, and you talk about, teams or under Urban, especially they'd always drop one sort of dud game that they just didn't come out and play very well. They'd sleep on somebody. Urban lost to Purdue infamously. I mean, that even happened in the national championship year, right? They lost to Virginia Tech that one game, and they still made the climb back to the playoff and then won. And now, you're right. You can afford another loss or 2 on your schedule more so than the previous years. The one thing I'll say though, Nick, along those lines, and this is the other point I was going to make. Ryan Day, this is the other reason why I think they're going to be ultimately prepared, or just supremely prepared is the word I was looking for. Because I get what you're saying. You can lose 1 or 2 games and still make the playoff, but Ryan Day can't afford to lose 1 or 2 games. He gets maybe 1 to Oregon, and he can't lose to Michigan again. He gets maybe 1 loss to Oregon, still can get in the playoffs. And then even in the playoffs, like they got at least, I think, get to like a semifinal for people to feel satisfied about the job that he's done. So I think that sort of ramps things up as well, where Ryan Day can't afford to let his team kind of fall asleep at the wheel here, because the one thing that he has in his, the one feather he has in his cap is that he doesn't lose to non-ranked Big Ten teams, and he's undefeated against those teams. And so if he now has that thrown on there, I think it's just another notch against him that people try to throw in his face. So he just can't afford it.
I understand that. I don't think Ohio State, though, they haven't had the conditions that bring out that appropriate fear yet, and you just never know how a team is until they have that appropriate fear. And the thing that I'll say about Ryan, because he comes off a bit robotic, and whether you want to call it insincere or a lack of charisma or whatever you say to how he appears, I don't know how he really is because we don't know him. However, like that is something guys who are not like Urban could scare the living crap out of dudes because he was a egotistical narcissist who
I mean, he would
lived
kick his kicker. So
yeah, well, I mean that's exactly what you do, and I punt punters too, just for people out there. I also make sure to go up to 25-year-old women in the bar and give them the old but that's all because Coach Urban taught me that. But I do think I it's not that I don't think they like or fear or anything like this with Ryan. It's that it's equal, they're different challenges, right? Ryan can only message this so much. But one of the downsides, and again, this is another thing we saw with Urban, it's something we haven't seen as consistently with Ryan, but we've seen it once or twice, is can you instill appropriate fear in your team? That's what Saban was so good at. And I don't know that I have seen that, because in the times that Ryan's teams have been punched in the face, I mean, it's been, the gear is, well, we're just going to out talent you. Well, you can't do that with everybody. You can't do that in every matchup. And so I'll just say this, like, again, it's not to disrespect Ryan. It's not to disrespect this team. But the downside of being a super team is, you're super talented and you can get off focus, and you don't know what a team does until you get them in that situation. They get knocked down. Like, that's almost an educated wish here. It's almost a good thing if Iowa pushes them and we see Ohio State outlast them, because it'll tell you, hey, a team stylistically came in and posed their will, and you were able to get the win or pull away late. I think that's part of this idea of is this a trap game conversation. In the long run, it might be part of the journey for Ohio State if that is this game.
I think maybe the only two times I can think of where like a Ryan Day team was kind of hit or like punched in the face and had to respond, I think Notre Dame last year was an example of that. And I mean, listen, I know we love to rag on Kyle McCord on this show. That was one of his better games as a member of the Buckeyes. Like, he made some incredible throws on that game-winning drive to Emeka Egbuka and others, marching the team down the field for the score. So like that was one. And then I think the other one you could probably reference is like you lose to Michigan 2 years ago, and then the response they had in the playoff against Georgia was fantastic. And a lot of that had to do with you had CJ Stroud, and he was always going to be able to keep you in a game, and he played one of his best games as a Buckeye that game. And obviously Marvin was great until he got hurt and had the concussion. But yeah, like those are the two instances I can think of. But you're right, like we don't have a ton of that, especially in the regular season, to make us feel comfortable that it's something that they're like exceptionally good at, or that he exceptionally like pulls out of that team. So I'm with you on that.
All right, guys, do you see this as a trap game? Let us know at Nick Wilson Says on literally every social media. I'm on TikTok now, so just let me know. Or at TikTok, or at Spencito _ You guys can also let us know on the 92.3 The Fan YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe and then comment in the videos whether you think that this is a potential trap game for Ohio State or not. Now, with that said, when we come back, we are going to bring back the Michigan Panic Meter and then get into 4-down territory. That is next. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. All right, guys, one segment to go. Let's start with the Michigan Panic Meter. I am now. If you guys are new to the show, we haven't done this in a bit. Basically, we look at where Ohio State is, we look at Michigan, and then we ask ourselves, what level of concern do we have with that Michigan game not too far off in the distant future?
Well,
Now,
maybe you haven't done it in a while, Nick, but I did it last week when
yeah,
you weren't here.
because you're a panicky Pete. All right, that's what you
No,
do.
that was the whole point. I did it to prove to you that my panic meter was still very low. And I'll just, you know what? I'm just going to go first here. My panic meter hasn't moved. It's still in the dark, dark gray. It remains where it was. They got a very, it was a, put the town on alert. It was one of those on Saturday where they almost let Minnesota creep back in and win that game. And they just looked
And the
like a
refs
team.
saved them.
Yeah, the refs did save them. And they look like a team that's ready to just get beat by Ohio State here in a little over a month. 2 months.
So the truth about that rivalry is we're officially back to, because it's the rivalry, there's always a wild card energy to this game. What I will say is Ohio State has passed every test so far, and I think Michigan has too. Now, Orgy's got to be a lot better as a passer. Like that's just, and I know that I just made a comment on the Iowa game. The Michigan game will never be a trap game. You're never going to overlook that game. So right now, I'm still very much in as far a gray as you can possibly be. There's nothing really that can make it move. But this game, ironically, this game is a good harbinger of like, okay, what should I expect out of an Ohio State-Michigan game? Because Iowa is so stacked in the trenches, and that's honestly how Jim Harbaugh was able to get Michigan back in the rivalry. Is for a couple of years, they've just been the better team in the trenches. So you never know. Like, depending on Michigan and how they perform this weekend and how you perform, I always worry more about the Ohio State side of the street in this and less about the Michigan. So this is another matchup that I think does kind of foreshadow maybe, our initial panic, concern, whatever with Michigan. Now, that being said, it's time for 4-down territory. What is first down there, Spence?
Yeah, so first up, we talked about Caleb Johnson a ton throughout the show and just how good of a player that he is. As you mentioned, he is an Ohio native, and he was asked this week, Nick, about if he has a chip on his shoulder because he didn't receive an offer from Ohio State. His quote, I mean, not really, because I really don't care about the offers and stuff like that, but I'm entering with a chip on my shoulder no matter what because it's Ohio State. I want to beat them, so I feel like even if they offer me, I wouldn't have went because I feel like I want to beat them. That's my goal. Do you believe him? Do you believe him as a son of Ohio, that he wouldn't have gone to Ohio State if they had actually offered him a deal?
Well, he is from practically northern Kentucky, which is Hamilton. So maybe he just grew up as a Kentucky football fan. I don't know. No, not really. But I think again, like this is what makes Iowa. Like there's a couple programs who've been able to dip into Ohio that like others haven't. Iowa's one, Kentucky is one. Like those programs, certainly Luke Fickell when he was at Cincinnati, I know that's within the program, but like he was fighting for Ohio State recruits at Cincinnati. That's super impressive. And it just goes to show you that like there's too many good football players in this state.
Yeah.
For Ohio State to hoard them up. Like it used to be just put the fence up around Ohio. It's impossible to do that now. So, I don't know that Caleb is being genuine with this. Some guys don't like to admit that they grew up rooting for the team that they're trying to beat. But what I will say is like, I think whenever a kid from Ohio goes somewhere else and does well, the response is, well, why isn't he at Ohio State? You can't take everyone. And I do think that this kid landed at one of the two perfect programs for Ohio kids to go, and it's Iowa and it's Kentucky. And that is the bedrock of both programs. So I don't believe him, but I do think the kid's a star, and, best of luck to him when you're not playing Ohio State.
I don't believe him either. Most people, if they get offered Ohio State, they're at least considering it. And I'm assuming because he went to Iowa, if he had gotten Ohio State, it probably would have been one of his, if not his best offer. And I just don't think he turns that down. So it's a convenient thing to say the week you're playing and when you ended up somewhere else. But I think he probably would have considered Ohio State if he got an offer. And I'm with you, though. I think he's a great player. And aside from this weekend, I wish him luck because I think he's fun to watch, and I think he's going to be fun to watch in the NFL one day as well.
That brings us to second down.
Yeah, we go to second down. And next up, we obviously wrapped up our post-game show very, very late on Saturday, Nick. But as we got done, I flipped on the TV and made sure to catch the end of the Alabama-Georgia game, which is probably the game of the year to this point. Really good stuff. Alabama wins and then jumps up to number 1 in the AP poll. Is that appropriate? Did they get it right to have them jump Texas and go straight to number 1?
Yeah, that's the best one of the season. I don't even think it's much of a discussion. Do you?
Not really, because I kind of thought about it for a second, like, well, does Texas deserve to get jumped when they've played? I mean, it's not like they've stumbled at any point. Like, their one good win is against Michigan, but then at the same time, they've also just beaten everybody that's on their schedule. They've beaten the brains out of them. But like, I'm with you that's the best one of the season. I mean, there was talk that like Georgia might have just stayed where they were because they were, or not, maybe not stay where they were because they were 2, but like that Georgia wouldn't have dropped lower than even like 4. Like they would have just dropped behind Ohio State and that was it, because of how good that game was. But I think they got it right. I actually think they got the whole top 5 right to this point with Bama, Texas, Ohio State, Tennessee, who's been great, and then Georgia goes to 5. I think that's a good top 5.
Third down.
Yeah, Nick. So the Big Ten and the SEC are meeting in Nashville next week to discuss some future things in regards to college football. I didn't get a chance to look at it, but I saw there was also a proposal that was leaked about like what a 2 mega conference and like 20 division setup would look like and all these different things. Nick, how close do you think we are to just a hostile takeover with the Big Ten and the SEC and having 2 mega conferences that sort of dominate the sport?
I mean, they can do it whenever they like, quite frankly. They have accrued so much power. And what I think is lost in this is that the SEC needs the Big Ten probably more than the Big Ten needs the SEC because the Big Ten has almost every major TV market in America.
From coast to coast.
So,
that's what the commercial shows us.
Whereas, maybe the SEC is a better football conference overall because they're so top heavy. Ohio State's got all those places you need. And here's the other thing that I think it does is I think it puts further pressure to squeeze out the ACCs, the Big 12s, where maybe you can shake free a few more of those premier kind of things there. So, I think this is huge. Now, at the same point, this is always going to be a detente. Because basically I think the only way it works is the Big Ten and SEC commissioners still keep their own commissioners, but then you have like a football czar above them, and then you have a basketball czar. And I don't know the commissioners. As forward thinking as Greg Sankey is, I don't know that's where the commissioners are going to go. But I think that's the only way you can avoid what eventually will be these 2 sides turning on each other. I'll also say I remember the way the last alliance in college sports turned out, and I don't necessarily want to see NWO versus DX at their height there. That's my big thing here. If it's not done the right way, this could end up really hurting college sports. So, and when I'm talking about it, I'm saying it could really hurt both big conferences. And so I think that's the warning is make sure you don't structure this in a way you get too big to fail or where all of a sudden it creates a power dynamic where you're still battling for resources.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is obviously coming in the very, very near future. And you're right. Like it's part of the changing landscape of it all. And we sort of saw how the last alliance went, but it certainly seems like those 2 sort of stake claim to being the conferences that you want to join up with. Like, there's fear from some of the other conferences that, they're going to kind of seize this moment, and some of these other schools get just like boxed out of the playoff altogether. And there was in the article I read about it, or about this meeting that's happening, there was a lot of talk about how the SEC and Big Ten are like trying to really stack the playoff field for those 2 conferences, where it's like they get like 4 bids each or something like that. And some of them are auto, and then the rest are like earned through how the, conference championships and all that play out. So that's kind of interesting. But Yeah, and I do think I wonder what that means for a school like you talk about taking teams from the ACC, taking teams from the Big 12 or the Pac-12 that's now sort of reforming. And I kind of wonder what that means for a school like Notre Dame, because at the same time, like, yeah, Notre Dame has their great TV deal with NBC, but if these two mega conferences sort of take over, it might actually force their hand to actually have to join a conference, because they're going to have to feel like at some point that there's better financial implications for the playoff bonuses and all those different things and more exposure that time of year. So that was another place my mind went with. It was like, what does that mean for Notre Dame? But yeah, it's I'm going to guess it probably doesn't happen during this iteration of the playoff, but they've already started talking about going to 14. And I think that's part of this meeting. And if that happens, once they establish when that's going to happen, because it seems like it's inevitable, I think that's where you're going to get like the two mega conferences. So maybe like 2 years from now is when that kind of takes shape. But yeah.
But wait, there's 4 down.
Yeah, I'd like to end on a fun one for you here. Which one-loss team, in your estimation, Nick, has the toughest road back to making the playoff?
Can I say Ole Miss simply because they play in the SEC? And because there's Lane.
See, but doesn't that help them because they have more opportunities to beat SEC teams, which is the best football conference?
Yeah, but not if you have 4 losses.
That is true.
Like I think that's the toughest thing about this. Who do you have?
My answer is going to be Notre Dame. I know it's Notre Dame. I know they're a big brand, but like you lose to a MAC school, and I'm trying to pull up real quick their schedule here. But from what I remember, their schedule is not very good the rest of the season. Aside from the best game they still have left on their schedule. Well, yeah, they beat Louisville last week, so that obviously helped their cause because that was a ranked team. But the best game they have left on their schedule is USC on November 30th. And by then, USC might be like a 2 or 3 or 4 loss team. So I just think like without a conference championship to help you out, and you have that, like you have the worst loss of any of these ranked teams on your resume right now, I think it's going to be tough. Push comes to shove, they could just end up getting in because of Notre Dame, and there might be like, well, we need a 12th and 11th team, so let's put them in. But I think like they have their work cut out for them because their schedule is very, very weak. And the games that were supposed to be big games for them, Texas A&M, who now has a couple losses, I believe, and Florida State, who they play in November, like that's not looking like a very good game anymore either. Like I just think it's a tough road back for them.
Real quick, I'll give you LSU too. Their win against USC doesn't look as impressive. They've got Ole Miss this week at home. Then they've got 2 weeks from now, Texas A&M on the road, Bama Alpha bye week at home, and then to close out the regular season, it's Oklahoma at home. That's, I mean, I think once you get to 3 losses, you're probably on the playoff bubble, even if you have a stacked schedule. So I think
is Brian Kelly on the hot seat?
No,
you don't think so?
They owe him too much money. This is the Jimbo Fisher. He'll get at least one more season if he doesn't have him in the playoffs.
You think he regrets leaving Notre Dame? By the way,
no. Brian, to be ashamed, you must have shame. And Brian Kelly has never second guessed himself.
He's on the there's no way that a guy who's standing there with his recruits doing the 360 camera, throwing up gang signs and acting like a weirdo has any shame. There's no chance.
That's exactly where we are. That's 4 Down Territory, guys. Please make sure to follow the show alongside wherever you get your podcasts. I forgot my bit. Apple, Spotify, 923thefan.com, the free Odyssey app. If I mention Apple, please follow Sons of the Shoe, guys. We count on your support. We appreciate it. Follow along on 923 The Fans YouTube page as well. Comment, like our videos, please, as well. And, by the way, I'm going to go Ohio State 26, Iowa 10. What do you have?
I'm going to go Ohio State 34. Iowa 10.
I believe
That's the under.
Yeah.
No, I was thinking about I was gonna go 35, but I was like, I think they get a field goal in there instead.
Look at that. I like the math you did in real time. All right, guys, we'll see you next week. We'll see you after the Iowa game for our post-game recap. Hopefully, an Ohio State win. Until then, guys, Spencer, go Bucks.
Go Bucks.